Steve Cohen, professor of Russian history at New York University, is here. We're looking at the Ukraine crisis, Central European state right now in failed possibilities. A failed state of 46 million people on the border of Russia, but also bordering Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania. The EU is right now making promises, but it hasn't written the check yet. There's a list in the Daily Telegraph out of London. Mr. Haig is on his way to Kiev. The European media is covering Ukraine very carefully. The cameras are in Independence Square. The cameras are in Kiev, but there's a very large country here. I'm going to go through the list quickly, and Steve will comment. These are potential presidents that the EU will name, asking Russia to endorse. The first is the heavyweight champion Klitschko. Then the one you know very well from the crisis several years ago, Tymoshenko, the very pretty woman who's now gone to Germany, we're told, for medical attention. She's also worth billions. She has to take care of her money. A man who's said to be the head of the regional administration in Kharkov. That's an eastern town. His name is Dobkin. Now, much more important, Turchenev. He's the Speaker of the Parliament. He's been acting president for several days. He looks grim. He's bald. Arseny Yatsenyuk. That is the man favored. He's the head of a party, the Fatherland Party, favored by the State Department. Victoria Nuland and her ill-considered remarks that were monitored by, we can presume, signals intelligence by the FSB. That's the choice of the State Department. Yatsenyuk, a liberal Democrat, no Jeffersonian. A man named Tynybok, who's associated with the OUN. Well, the OUN, that is the ultranationalist, neo-Nazi, fascist group. Look for the red and black flag. Wherever you see the yellow and blue flag of Ukraine, look around quickly and you'll see the red and black flag. All Ukrainians know what that means. That's Western Ukraine, that's Lviv. These are men descended from men who fought with the Nazis and the Hitlerites. They were part of the invasion of Russia. They're fervently anti-Soviet, but they're also anti-Semitic, anti-Western, anti-just about everything you can celebrate for democracy. Petro Poroshenko. Steve Cohen tells me he's a very wealthy man. Keep your eye on him. And one more, a dark horse candidate, leader of the Pravi sector, a right-wing paramilitary outfit. Red and black flag again. There are several of them. His name is Yarosh. Steve, you like Poroshenko. Why?
It's not that I like him, but the problem they have in Ukraine is that each of the logical candidates carries a lot of baggage. Let me mention a couple you mentioned. You're right that Nuland, the leading State Department diplomat for Europe, who was overheard telling the American ambassador, we want Yatsenyuk, and he's, by the way, he's English speaking. I think he's an economist. He also has a law degree. He's been around a long time, though he's young. He's got a lot of leadership experience. He's a civilized man. And when the woman with the beautiful gold hair wrapped around her head, Tymoshenko, went to prison, he, being her deputy, took charge of her party, which is called Fatherland. The problem he has is he's now expected to step aside for her because she was martyred by prison. The problem she has is Ukrainians actually don't like her very much. She's associated with Ukrainian politics over the last 10 years, failed, corrupt politics. Consider this. 4 years ago, in what everybody deemed a free election, she lost to this thuggish clown Yanukovych, who was elected and who's now fled, by 3 percentage points. In other words, the nation preferred him to her. She's thought to be very corrupt, to have, as she was once in charge of the gas industry.
She's extremely wealthy.
She's known she was involved in a couple court cases that reached into the American legal system.
And her money's well hidden.
And people in Russia have a lot of documents generated by the American court case that they could release at any moment. So I think Fatherland Party, though she's, been martyred by prison, and we saw her in the wheelchair coming to the square and the people greeting her and weeping, but she probably is not the strongest candidate. And they may ask her to step aside for this one preferred by the Americans, Yatsenyuk, but that's an internal party dispute. Probably the best-known candidate in the West, because boxing fans know him, is the 6'8" Vitaly Klitschko, who until about 3 or 4 months ago was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He has a brother, Vladimir, who also fights in the heavyweight division, and who's, I think, number 2 ranked, but they promised their mother they would never fight each other. And sometimes we in the West get them confused. But Vitaly Klitschko has now gone into politics. Today, I watched it on the news, he announced in Ukraine, speaking Russian, by the way, that he will run for the president. So he's going to be a candidate if they have this election in May. But as you say, the IMF or whoever is going to write the check in the West is going to sign off on a future government, and not just the government between February and May, because if you're going to give them 25 or 30 billion, you're talking about the next couple of years. They want to know who the candidates are going to be. And so emerges, it seems to me, possibly a powerful Ukrainian oligarch, you just mentioned him, named Poroshenko.
The chocolate oligarch.
What's interesting about him, he made a lot of money in Russia, but he remained in Ukraine. He parked his billions in Europe, or maybe in the United States, which means that the authorities in the European Union have some control over him, because those are their banks. During the protest, he owns television stations in Ukraine. He broadcast in an uncensored way the protesters without endorsing them. That is, he didn't break with the regime, with the president, and he didn't break with the protesters. So he emerges as a compromise candidate, and one probably acceptable to the West. But this would be the kind of technocratic government that the West wants. But I think the reality is, John, that Kiev doesn't control Kiev or the country. Remember that last Friday, you mentioned this at the top of the broadcast, the foreign ministers from the West flew into Kiev, from Poland, Germany, and France, with a Russian observer, and they brokered a deal.
Early elections, participation of the opposition in the government, Yanukovych signed on to it, money was to change hands, except for the right wing.
Well, I mean, they claim that everybody was down. I mean, that was what these
who busted the agreement. I was told it was the paramilitaries in the street, especially the OUN and their sector.
It was, loosely speaking, it was the street, because these professional diplomats representing everybody from Merkel to Obama left the room congratulating themselves by saying, essentially, we have cleaned up a mess that Putin created. Putin didn't create the mess, they did. But nonetheless, they got their jab in at Putin. And they thought, on Friday night, that they had solved the Ukrainian crisis through political negotiations.
I saw the red and black flag outside the parliament the next day, and that's when Yanukovych fled. When he saw the red and black flag
But by the next day, that piece of paper was ashes. Yanukovych, who was the primary signature to the agreement, had fled the country because his life was in danger.
And the EU never condemned the coup.
Well,
still hasn't.
Now we're in a position where the Russian government is asking the EU and Washington to condemn the coup. But of course, instead, the EU and Washington are supporting it in the desperate hope they can control it, which brings us back to where we began, the formation of a new government. But again, I want to come to this point.
Well, Steve, we'll take a break, and when we come back, I want to bring the Crimea in this. The Black Sea Fleet is in the Crimea, also Odessa, not in the Crimea, where I'm told there are a lot of Russian citizens, all of them at risk because there's no government in Kiev. Steve Cohen, Professor Steve Cohen, Russian History, New York University. I'm John Batchelor.